All right, welcome to another 902 gaming video, and today I'm going to do a follow-up to the video I just posted where I listed the overplayed cards or overvalued cards, and I'm going to be doing the underplayed and undervalued cards, one for each color. I decided to do this because I feel like there's a lot of decks that choose for some reason not to play these cards, or there's some potential for a deck to be built around these cards specifically. And first up we kind of have a tie for green. Well, I think one of these, the Froghemoth, is still played a bit. I think it's still undervalued as a 5-drop in green. It's trample haste, and then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can exile up to that many cards. And then it gets a +1/+1 counter for each creature exiled, or you gain 1 life for each non-creature card exiled. Fits pretty good. Fits pretty well in the mono green deck, just as a really good 5-drop. Now you have the 4-mana 4/4 haste creature in the Uvenwald Oddity. That's trample haste as well. And then it flips to a Uvenwald Monstrosity, which is the 8/8 side. So you can curve that 4-drop into this 5-drop, and you have 2 trample hasting creatures. I think it gives green a really good punch in that sense. But I think there's other uses for this card, and just even in general, just mid-range decks, because of the fact that it can gain you life, the fact that it gets much, much bigger, and it has trample. I find it especially useful. I think there was a green-white deck that I had played that the card actually impressed me a lot, which kind of made it slot into this, into one of the underplayed or undervalued cards for green. The other one, now this is the only color I'm going to do this for, is In Search of Greatness. And this is a 2-drop. Now, my guess for this card is the reason why it's not played. I've seen it played a little bit. And again, going back to that green-white deck that I had played, the video was up on my channel. When I played it in that deck, I saw how good it actually was. And maybe the person that designed that deck wanted to take full advantage of this card. And basically, as long as you're playing a bunch of permanents, you get to play, basically cast 2 spells a turn. And with the Froghemoth and the Uvenwald Oddity, you can really start packing a punch. So you can play one or the other, or one off the other, and then cast a big threat on the same turn. So imagine having this out. You have the Uvenwald Oddity out. Then on turn 5, you get to play the Froghemoth for free, and then play another land, and then drop something else. You can drop a Wrenn and 7 or something like that, or an Asika's Chariot. So it really gives the green deck quite a bit of reach and quite a bit of, I guess, card advantage, kind of. I think that's where the downfall is with this card, and potentially why it's not played as much as it could be. But even for just the scry effect alone, it gives decks that can play this card some card advantage. Now, I think the downside of this card is the fact that it's 2 green mana, and you really, really, really want it on turn 2. Between turn 2 and turn 4 is when you really, really want it. Ideally, turn 2 is the best time to have it. So I think that's what kind of keeps it from being played as much as it could be. But I really like the card, and I really recommend, if you haven't played either one of these cards, that you give them both a try, because they're pretty awesome. All right. So next up in white, we have Wedding Announcement. Now, I noticed that this is starting to see a lot of play, especially in the black-white decks. There's a black-white deck that I had posted recently that played this, and Meathook Massacre, and a bunch of token generators like Lolth and stuff like that. And I think it's very, very powerful in that deck. And I think one of the first decks that I had played it with was a red-white deck that had this, and another card that's going to be in red that's coming up shortly, where I think it's underplayed. And the fact that it allows you to either draw a card if you attack, or it creates a 1/1 token for free, basically. So basically, you can get 3 1/1 tokens, and if your opponent doesn't interact with any of it at all, eventually they will flip. The Wedding Announcement will flip and give all your creatures +1/+1. So you will have 3 2/2s and potentially have drawn a card at some point, maybe, or maybe 2 2/2s and draw a card. So I think this card right now is very underplayed, especially in white. I think it's used in decks where I think any deck that's playing white right now should be playing this card. That's just how strongly I feel about it. I think it's just that good. Now, mind you, if you're not playing any creatures at all, then I don't think it's that great. But I think with just any amount of creatures, even if you're playing like a Jeskai version of the blue-red deck, you know, with Alrund's Epiphany. If you look at Alrund's Epiphany, this also pumps up the bird tokens. So even with that deck in mind, this card is still really, really good, especially on turn 3. Yeah, I can't really sing this card's praises any more than that. And I think once the mono white deck starts adopting this card, I think it's going to be a problem for the format. I think. Just guessing. I'm going out on a limb with this one. But I think it's going to be a problem. Not that I think that it's not going to be any good, because I think it's amazing. But I think there's just so many uses for this card, no matter what color combination that you're playing, even if you're just mono white, even if you're black white, even if you're, you know, maybe some form of Abzan or something, or Jeskai or something. This card should slot into every deck that plays white, as far as I'm concerned. There may be some cases where you don't want to play it. But every deck nowadays is playing some amount of creatures. Even on its own, I think it's still very, very good. And even great in multiple. So if you can drop this on turn 3 and then another one on turn 4, you're likely going to win that game. Next up, we have blue. There was 2 cards that I had tried to decide which one is more underplayed at the moment. And I think one card might not be quite as good as I think it is. But we're just going to, I decided to pick one, and the only one I decided to have 2 was green. This was going to be another one where I had 2, but I decided to go with just Jacob, Hawken, and Spectre. Oh, Hawken, and Hawken's Insight. I'm going to say Hawken. I'm wrong.
Hadouken!
I came to this conclusion while I was playing this card once, and I realized that I'm using it. I was trying to play it originally so I could flip it. So when I flipped it, I had a big, you know, really big spells, some, you know, stuff that I can play for free. Like maybe I tried originally, I think one of the first decks I played it in was like Blood on the Snow. So I would tuck Blood under the Snow, or Blood on the Snow under it, and then hopefully be able to flip it and then cast that card for free. That is the wrong way to evaluate this card, I think. I think you just sort of have to look at it as a 2-mana looter. And basically any other time you would have a 2-mana looter, whatever you discard, don't expect to get it back. You know, don't expect to have it flip and then be able to cast that spell. So you don't want to really tuck your best cards underneath it. You just kind of want it to loot through your deck, and then with the potential benefit of flipping over. Right. So I think it was kind of like Jace, Vryn's Prodigy a few years ago. Similar type of card. Where in that you do want it to flip, but it doesn't need to flip. You can just use it as a looter, even though you don't, you know, even though a looter technically goes to your graveyard, this one gets exiled, and then you lose it if Jacob Hawken dies. But I think that downside, most decks that will play a looter, unless they're playing like some type of reanimation strategy, don't really care if you discard, you know, like discarding and exiling if you're not doing anything with your graveyard. And that's where the realization came for me. If you're doing that, doesn't really matter if you can't get cards back from your graveyard. Now, in certain circumstances, you may not want to play it in every single deck that plays blue, but I think there's a deck. I was playing a deck, I think it's on the channel, I'm not 100% sure, where I was playing this. If not, I have a deck coming up with it. I was playing this and in a Sultai deck that was using Snakeskin Veil to protect it. So then it could actually flip. And then I played a bunch of other little creatures to sort of help. So I think in something like that, I think it's very good. I think right now, I just think it's underplayed. I think just about every deck, maybe not the blue-red deck necessarily, just because it plays a lot of cards with flashback and stuff, and you don't really want to, you know, if it was discard, then I could see it for sure. I think people would be playing a lot more. But I think this is much like another card on this list that's coming up. I think it can inspire a deck on itself, or in and of itself. I think it's that good. And I think it might not be until rotation until we actually see how good this card actually is, but I have a feeling that this card is going to be very, very good in the near future, unless there's something weird comes up or something like that. But I think people are undervaluing this card quite a bit, and misevaluating it. I think people see it as like, oh, I got to get it to flip, and I want it to flip, so I want to put good cards underneath it. And I don't think that's the way you have to play it. I think in the moment, if you cast this card and then you activate it, and you have a bunch of removal spells or whatever you happen to have, you may not need one of them, but at least you get to draw that extra card with it. And I think that's something that's lacking. And again, this one also doesn't. You don't have to activate it as a sorcery. I think that would completely nullify this as a good card. So you can tap it, and then basically pay the 6 mana and then flip it at the same time. So it's not one of those ones that you have to activate as a sorcery. And then when you look at the flip side of it, once you get to the flip side, if your opponent can't remove enchantments, most decks, main deck can't. That's where it starts shining. Obviously, that's where you want it to get to the point. So it's the first half is, I think, good. I think if the card was just 2 mana, 0/2 draw card and then exile card from your hand, I think it would still be playable. The fact that you can pay the 6 mana and then flip it and then start casting spells for free, I think makes it. I think it just puts it way over the top. And I think much like Jace, like I said, much like Jace Vryn's Prodigy, we'll see more play as time goes on, I think. All right, so next up we have Red, and this is one of the ones I was mentioning with Wedding Announcement. And I realized how good both of these cards were in tandem. This is another card that from Crimson Vow right now is not seeing a lot of play. And I've been destroyed by this card, and I have destroyed people playing this card along with Wedding Announcement. So imagine curving Wedding Announcement, 3 mana, and then 4 mana to Stensia Uprising. So in a couple of turns, when Wedding Announcement flips, then all of your 1/1 red tokens are going to be 2/2s. And then it even has that extra benefit of, if you control exactly 13 permanents, you can deal 7 damage to any target. 7 damage to any target is nothing to sneeze at. But much like I think Jacob in blue, I think people are looking at this as a burn spell and not as just a 1/1 token maker, basically a free 1/1 token maker every single turn. And if you have a couple of Wedding Announcements flipped, or anything else that pumps your creatures, I think they're just going to get huge. So you have a couple of these, and then something else that pumps it. So every turn you're making a 2/2 or a 3/3 or a 4/4 or something like that every single turn. You don't have to sacrifice it, again, because it says may. So that's another key thing. But there have been instances, much like Jacob, and much like in Search of Greatness on this deck as well, in this list, much like in Search of Greatness and Jacob in this list, they're cards that I think people are misevaluating right now. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe it's not playable as much as I think it is, but every time I've been able to curve Wedding Announcement to this, I almost never lose that match. Unless my opponent is playing just a bunch of enchant removal, or they're playing, something that destroys all permanents or something like that. But yeah, I can't say enough about this card. I think over time, I think people will start seeing this as a very, very, very good card. And I think it's just undervalued right now. And I think you should give this card a try again alongside Wedding Announcement, and just give it a try and see how it kind of does. I think it's definitely worth playing for sure. And I think, like I said, I think potentially Wedding Announcement and this are the core of a deck. I don't know what, maybe a Jeskai version that plays Wedding Announcement, Stensia Uprising, and Alrund's Epiphany. I've kind of tested that around a little bit. It seems very gross and very disgusting. I'll probably do a deck tech on it soon. But yeah, I think it's just undervalued. I think people haven't found a home for it yet, or are misevaluating it. I think that's a common theme on this list. But I think players are just misevaluating it right now. It's from a new set. I think most of these cards are from the new set, actually. I think except for 2. And I think that might be why. I think people aren't, they're not, especially on Arena, or maybe only on Arena. People aren't really key to spend their wild cards on something that's not already established. Again, I think I've said in a previous video where I think people just get one deck and then stick to that deck, and then maybe change it the following season. Maybe add a card here or there once somebody else has proven that it's good. So I think that's when you'll see that change. All right. So next up we have black, and in black I have this is kind of a pet card, personal favorite card of mine. I think that it's underplayed. It potentially could have been played prior to this season. And again, this list is only from early rotation this year, and I think it was in October to now. And I think this card is underplayed. There's a couple of caveats with that as well. Again, I do have a small bias towards this card because I love it. I've always had great success with this card in multiple decks. The only time that this card tends to fall flat is against the blue-red decks. But other than that, I think in every single other matchup that I've ever used this card, it's been fantastic. And maybe not against mono white, because 4-mana removal spell against mono white's not really the best. But leading, if you can cast something like Path of Peril or something, and then lead into this to get their next threat that they play after you clear the board, then I think it's very, very good. So Gelatinous Cubes exiles a non-ooze creature, which is very important, although there's not a lot of oozes being played. Unless you're play against the ooze tribal deck that I played against one time, and I was sitting with 3 of these in my hand. I was like, oh, I can't do anything with these. But that small rare case aside, the fact that you can just exile any creature until it leaves the battlefield. There's been plenty of cards in the history of Magic that are like this. Faceless Butcher, Necrotal even is very similar. There's been a bunch of cards like this. So you exiles it until it leaves play, and then when it leaves play, the creature enters the battlefield again. You want to avoid creatures that have another comes into play trigger when you cast this. But, in a specific deck or in a deck that takes advantage of this card. So if you're playing like Reanimator, I'm surprised I don't see this card in Reanimator decks. I'm surprised I don't see this card in decks that use Dollhouse of Horrors. There's a bunch of cards right now that it can really, like, when you get to that point where you swept the board, or maybe they only have 1 or 2 creatures, or they're only playing a certain thing, you can exile something that they're playing to, especially against mono green. I think if you sweep the board and then play this on their next threat, again, especially if they're playing something like the Old Growth Troll, something that if it dies, they'll get a land. It can chant a land, and then they can get another token back. This card can help take care of that permanent as well. And then you have to look at the second ability, which I think a lot of people skip over. That you can actually exile the card that's exiled. You can actually put it into your opponent's graveyard. So it skips that step of the Old Growth Troll, where they can kind of get it back, get it as enchantment, pay a big threat, and then have it as a 4/4 token again. So it deals with stuff like that. It's a 4/3 creature for 4 mana, which even in and of itself, it's still a decent card. But yeah, I just think it's undervalued right now. I also think it's underplayed and potentially misevaluated. It may be that there's not a great place in the format for a 4 mana removal spell. But I mean, I think people still play like Hagra Mauling, and there's a bunch of other spells that people play at 4 mana. But I think you built the deck to take advantage of a card like this. So, a Reanimator deck, that like Diagraph Rebirth, or something that plays like Dollhouse of Horrors. So even if they manage to kill this, you can play it again with Dollhouse of Horrors, and then take advantage of it like that as well. So I think Gelatinous Cube for black is, I think, again, it's a pet card of mine, but also I think it's also underplayed. I think it could be played a little bit more than it is right now, especially in any deck that's playing black. All right. So the last card we have is in gold. So for the gold artifacts and lands, obviously I think all the lands that are playable in standard right now are being played. I think this was potentially another one where I had 2, but because I've been playing Nissa of Shadowed Boughs, I have to say that right. I keep wanting to say Nissa of Shadowed Boughs. I think it's underplayed. Potentially, again, I think much like some of the other cards on this list, I think this is you build a deck around this card. And I can understand, I mean, maybe in the previous format, where landfall was more accessible, again, you don't really have a lot of extra landfall, like you only have really Evolving Wilds and stuff in this format. So potentially in the prior format, it was played more, but I can't speak to that. Didn't start playing standard again until October of this year, I think it was. But every time I played this card, I'm amazed at how good it actually is. And there's a few reasons for that. I mean, first you have the landfall ability. So whenever a land enters the battlefield, this gets a loyalty counter. Then you can untap one of your lands, and then you can choose to make it. I think that's something that people miss as well. You can choose to make it a 3/3 creature, or you can choose not to. You can just basically use it as a extra mana. So basically, you can play this, play a land, tap, and then pay. You can +1 it, and then untap a land, and you have 6 mana basically. And this will have 6 loyalty counters on it. So I think for that reason alone, I think it's a very, very good Planeswalker. And then one of the things I didn't realize was the -5 ability returns a creature with a converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control, not the number of loyalty counters, the number of lands you control, and then it gets 2 +1/+1 counters. The last little part of that was what I had missed initially when evaluating this card on my own. Didn't realize it actually pumped whatever creature you bring back from the graveyard. So again, on that, if you have this and then you +1 and then you want to return it, creature from your graveyard, you'll likely only have maybe a 3 mana or less to return. So, but if you have something like this and you have the fan favorite from my first list, the Skewed Swarm, which is 3 mana, and it died, and you return it to the battlefield, then it comes back as a 3/3. However, there's many, many cards at 3 mana that are much, much better. Serulf with this card is amazing because it gets 2 +1/+1 counters. Then it's a 5/5, and basically what ends up happening then is, on your next turn after that, after you return it, you can exile everything with converted mana cost 2 or less. So it can act as a sweeper in that instance. Again, this is a card that I think has to be built around, much like Wedding Announcement, Stencia, and Jacob in this list, and In Search of Greatness. I think this is a build-around card. But I don't think you necessarily need like Evolving Wilds and stuff to take full advantage of this card. I think you just have to play enough lands to actually be able to trigger it. At least, the turn you play it or the turn after you play it. So I think this card here is I think it's undervalued, but I think if you're playing black-green, I think it's worth it to consider playing this card just because it can return any of your cards and make them huge. So for the last card, I think it's undervalued or underplayed in standard right now. I think it's Nissa of Shadowed Bows. But yeah, that'll do it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And hopefully you had a good New Year, and I will see you in the next one.